Okay, I'm going to open the meeting, Branch 8 membership meeting, August 9th, 2020. Welcome, guys.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
All right.
Thanks to you guys that completed the lunch and restart survey, we had over 50%, which is big. And so we dealt with resuming in-person meetings this fall. And we're going to meet back at the Hilton. Can somebody mute?
Yeah, if you could mute yourself, please.
We'll continue to hold our meetings at the Hilton. That was overwhelming to stay there. And on the second Monday of the month, as usual. And our restart committee is going to be meeting this week. We're planning on Thursday, but we're going to shoot for our first luncheon on October 11th. So stay tuned. Get your phones. If you're disconnected, you just have to start over again, and renaming, if your name is in the lower left-hand corner, click on the upper right-hand corner of your square and click rename, and type in the new name. I think everybody's pretty much done that. Public health update. Guess what, guys? The masks are back. We're required for all of our indoor activities and events, and you can get the information on the Contra Costa County website. I'm not going to belabor the point. You know where to find the info. Our barbecue is ready to go. We've got about 120 people coming, and this is a good time. And I think there's still room to sign up if you can go. We have a new assistant secretary. Ron Rizzo had to leave due to personal reasons, and Rich Carlston stepped in. And after 9 years, Daryl Skiles is retiring from the greeting committee. And Joe Mischione, his assistant, is taking over. And just as an announcement, any of you guys like to be on the greeting committee, we're going to be looking for another assistant. So it's a good job. It's a fun job. Gives you a chance to meet everybody. And we have special recognition and thank you to Bill Peterson. For those of you that don't know, Bill, after a bit of long illness, passed away on August 7th, and a real loss to the chapter. If you look at 17 years, an honorary life member, attendance secretary for 15 years, did a lot of work. He was the epitome of a SER member, and he will definitely be missed. And we'll get some further announcements if there's going to be any memorial service or celebration of life. Anniversaries. Rich Ball, 20 years. Ron Draper, 15. Glenn Gilman, 10. And some big birthdays. Look at those 90 guys. We're getting a lot of guys. That's why you join SERS. We last a long time. Ed Myrtle, Dave Perkins, and Glenn Richards in their 90s. Congrats for making it that far, guys. Sad news, another one. Dick Brewer, we lost him on July 16th. And we're really looking for a volunteer to help out on the Sunshine Committee. So contact me or Steve Schramm. And it's a well rewarding job, and we could use some help. Now, activities. We're getting SERS in the games back. Contact Steve Schramm again. Looking to get to an Oakland A's game on September 9. Rubber Bridge is restarting. Rod Spicer in charge. Writing Your Life Story on Zoom. Contact Tom Hodgkin. And we've got the big annual golf outing on September 20th to 22nd. And Bill Koski is handling that. And go ahead and please continue to check the hotline for more details on other reopenings. And congratulations to the winners of last month's Boomer Zoomer, Rob Layback and Meng Horn. And Rich knows who you got for this month.
Okay, this month we have two people, Lynn Oakleaf and Bill Phelan.
Well, congrats, guys. Bill Phelan and Lynn Oakleaf. Okay. You will be contacted and you'll get your due reward. Thanks, guys. Leo, would you like to introduce our speaker? Where's Leo? Leo Dominguez
Is our speaker here yet?
is our speaker.
Yes, I'm here.
Here. Oh, Mary's here. Okay.
Leo, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Where's Leo?
I'm right here. I was calling Mary just in case. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let me present Mary Theroux. She's the Senior Vice President of the Independent Institute. Let me just tell you a little bit about the Independent Institute. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy research and educational organization. And what they really want to try and do is to apply independent thinking to really create solutions. Mary is going to be talking today about homelessness in the Bay Area, which I think all of us are going to be very interested in because of the insight and in-depth research that they have done. So as you can see on the PowerPoint, Mary's done a lot of things with Salvation Army in Alameda County in San Francisco. She's done a lot of directors of 9 corporations and 3 foundations. She's been a very busy person, and I'll let you read out everything else. But I think Mary, you'll really enjoy her presentation. We had a little bit of flavor of it before this. With a few of us, and I think it's going to be really good for all the membership. So, thank you, Mary, for coming. I appreciate it.
And I'll stop sharing and turn it over to Mary. Okay, Mary, I'm going to stop the share.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for letting me be with you today. And let me just try to see where my sharing is. Okay. I'm very pleased to be with you. As mentioned, I've spent the last several years just pretty much consumed with the subject of homelessness, both working with the Salvation Army's board in San Francisco and in Alameda County on devising alternative solutions to it, as well as with independent pursuing research into the causes, the policies that impact it, and proposing alternative solutions. So we're very happy to give you a sneak preview of our forthcoming policy report on the subject. We've also just wrapped a new documentary on it and are very excited to be able to share it. So let me just start that. Our initiative is called Beyond Homeless. As was mentioned, Independent is a nonpartisan academic research organization that was founded in San Francisco in 1986. Everything we produce is peer reviewed, so it's academic, it's nonpartisan, and importantly, all of our researchers are tasked with coming up with solutions to problems, not just saying why we have problems and so on, but how we can actually solve them together. Recently, again, we've really been concentrating on, well, some of us have been very much concentrating on the issue of homelessness, which is just grossly impacting, I know, all of our communities, destroying civil society, and of course, human lives. A few years ago, a coalition of 32 non and for-profits was formed in San Francisco. This includes organizations such as Gensler and WebCore, as well as land use attorneys, plus nonprofit service providers like the Salvation Army. And the Independent Institute signed on as policy partner. Each of us is providing our services on a pro bono basis to the coalition, because banding together to solve the problem the government has failed to solve over the past 40 years. So I obviously, when people find out I've been working on homelessness, they ask me, so just what has caused homelessness? Is it housing? Is it mental illness? Is it addiction? Is it trauma? Or is it just a lifestyle choice? People want to live that way. And the answer is yes. There's many causes of homelessness as there are individuals experiencing homelessness. There's no one story, there's no one cause. A lot of it's caused by trauma, especially childhood trauma. We have destroyed families in this country and left children deeply at risk. They're growing up in violent and very stress-filled households and not learning how to be successful, autonomous adults, and do end up with severe mental illness in many cases and or addiction. So since there's so many causes of unique causes of homelessness, any one size fits all would not solve it. And over the years, there have been different fads in homelessness. For years, emergency shelters were very common. Transitional housing programs were very common. Both developed bad reputations, and the federal, state, and local governments now direct all of their funding pretty much to what's called Housing First, as a one-size-fits-all, extremely expensive solution. The thinking behind Housing First is very simplistic. If you give somebody a house, they're no longer homeless. So, and the houses that they're providing are incredibly expensive. These permanent supportive units cost $500,000 to $900,000 each. That's one unit, one apartment for one or two people. So you could never build enough to solve homelessness through this route. There are an estimated 161,000 individuals who are homeless in California alone. So that's a price tag of something like $80 billion if you want to solve it this way. But more importantly, Housing First doesn't solve it. The underlying issues are not addressed. The name Housing First implies that services will follow, but the problem is all of the money is being spent on this very expensive housing and the services are not being provided. And even when they are, the individuals living in these housing units are not required or even particularly suggested that they participate, so the majority do not. So their underlying issues remain unaddressed. They retain their mental illness, they retain their addictions, and often I talked to one San Francisco police captain who termed Housing First units as a place where the homeless go to die more slowly. The police and the fire department are called out to them frequently. People are in psychosis, they're overdosing, and so on. And then a social worker with whom I spoke said they're inside, but culturally they're homeless. We're just warehousing people with their problems. So we have to address the root causes and we have to provide individualized solutions. I've looked around the country. I've visited a lot of programs around the country that are having success, but one really stood out because of its solving the issue at scale. It's solved the issue for an entire city. San Antonio has a population of 2 million. Its economy is highly dependent on tourism, as ours is, and yet it's not an affluent community. Its average household income is only $46,000. And yet they came together and built Haven for Hope, and they've achieved an 80% decrease in downtown unsheltered homelessness since it opened. Again, Haven opened in 2010. This is its campus. It looks like a college campus, and it encompasses a full range of programs and services. The main part of the campus is called the Transformational Campus. It offers a variety of residential accommodations for everything from LGBTQ youth and up to families and individuals. And it offers services from 70 different nonprofits that maintain offices on the campus. It's based on a recovery model, and individualized plans are crafted around each person's needs. A team will come alongside each person and deal with what happened to you, what's your story, what are your barriers to living independently, and then they build a plan with the support needed for them to achieve it. There's no time limit to stay there. However, the average length of stay now is only 6 months. because they've gotten so good at helping people overcome their problems. And 90% of program participants go on to independent living and are still there a year later. In addition, the campus also has a low barrier emergency shelter, meaning people can, it's a safe sleeping site, very safe with security. And you can be stoned or high there. Unlike on the transformational campus, you can have pets, possessions, they provide mental care. St. Anthony's gives 3 hot meals a day. There's showers, there's mail service, and so on. In designing Haven, they surveyed individuals experiencing homelessness, and their number one concern is safety. Haven offers a completely secure environment, both in the emergency shelter and the larger campus. There have been no incidents of stabbings or shootings in its 11-year history. Police report that the surrounding community is also much safer than it was before Haven was established. Very interestingly, Haven employs, in addition to its own armed security staff, they employ moonlighting police officers. And the police officers who work there get to know these people. They get to know people who are suffering from mental illness. They get to know people who are suffering from addiction. So when they're on the street and they encounter somebody like this, such as a George Floyd, they understand how to talk to them, how to deal with them. They don't just try to put them in handcuffs. They will talk to them. They will offer them a ride out to Haven. And it's worked out incredibly well. Importantly, Haven for Hope is a community-wide solution. It's not just a shelter. It involves every aspect of the community. Originally, it was the idea of a local businessman. He called the Democratic mayor, whose election he had opposed, and said, we need to do something. The mayor enthusiastically agreed and appointed the businessman as chairman of a task force. The task force included representatives from across the community activists, everybody. Funds to build Haven were raised privately, and the city contributed the land. Virtually every nonprofit in the city works with Haven. 70 of them, as I said, have offices on campus. Another 84 provide services at their own sites, in total providing over 300 different services. So again, it's highly individualized. Police can take individuals suffering from mental illness or substance abuse, or prisoners that they're under arrest that have a minor injury. They can take them out to Haven instead of to jail. It saves both a lot of money in public services, and it also gets the police back on the street quickly rather than having to book somebody. Judges in San Antonio offer prisoners who pose dangers from addiction or mental illness a choice in sentencing. They can go to prison or they can go to Haven. And the people who enter Haven via this route have as high a success rate as anybody else who comes to Haven. So the result is a community that supports the whole, with every sector contributing to the ongoing health of the city. I spent a week in San Antonio, staying at a hotel downtown, walked around at night by myself. I felt incredibly safe. I saw maybe a total of 10 people, homeless people in my week there, and no tents. Needless to say, their tourism lifeblood is flowing, and the community just feels really good and vibrant. Campus population, they serve 1,700 pre-COVID. Currently, they're distanced, so they have 900 plus they're operating a hotel. 6,000 individuals have transitioned from homelessness to living in permanent or supportive housing since they opened. And it's saved almost $100 million in public funds for, again, police services, city and county jails, emergency rooms, and courtrooms in 8 years of operations. In San Francisco, by contrast, the city and county, as well as our state government, just keeps throwing more and more money at the problem, which are the blue bars, and yet homelessness continues to grow, the green line. Last year's Prop C, the judge confirmed that Prop C is legal, and that'll add $300 million to the spending. And I predict the green line is just going to keep going up. Almost all of this funding, again, is going to housing first, moving people from the street into very expensive permanent housing with no requirement or expectation to access services. People die in housing first, people fall out of housing first, back into homelessness. For every one person housed, an additional 3 become homeless. So it will never, ever, ever solve this problem. During COVID, of course, the city added hotel rooms and so-called safe sleeping sites, which is such as this one in front of City Hall, to its mix of so-called solutions. The hotel rooms cost the city $6,000 a month because that's what they're paying in the contracts. And each of these tents costs the city $61,000 a year. Drug use is rampant. Addiction, mental illness problems are rampant. The Department of Homelessness and Housing Services is very proud of citing that in all of 2020, only 3 people experiencing homelessness died of COVID. Well, we're not sure if that's actually because there are no documented instances of outdoor transmission of COVID, or if it's actually the result of their efforts. But we do know that 712 people experiencing homelessness died of overdoses in 2020, a 50% increase from the year before. And 2/3 of those 712 people were housed either in hotels or city provided hotel rooms or city provided permanent supported housing units. So again, housing is clearly not solving this problem. 2021 is on track to come in with over 1,000 overdose deaths. This is a solution that kills people. Because so many people experiencing homelessness, again, are gravely disabled from addiction or mental illness, there's been ongoing calls to pass conservatorship measures to mandate that they go into care. San Francisco's result from one attempt was the passage of SB 1045. However, 2 years after its passage, only 1 person has been placed into conservatorship among the city's over 8,000 unsheltered homeless. Supervisor Raphael Mendelman, who co-sponsored the bill, said, "I said at one time that even if SB 1045 only helped 1 person, I believed it was worth doing. And I still believe that, but I didn't think it would actually literally be just 1 person." In addition to the $200 million San Francisco spends annually warehousing 10,000 people in Housing First, the city mostly spends a great deal of money moving the homeless around. One of our staff took this video in her neighborhood. 5 city vehicles, count them 5, moving 1 tent, which returned 6 hours later with the addition of a mattress. I mentioned we recently completed filming of a documentary. In my interviews with individuals on the street, I heard time and time again that the city's so-called outreach workers offer no real assistance. Here I'm interviewing Cooper, who's a disabled firefighter who's been homeless for 10 years. She uses her EMS training to serve as a street medic on her own time and using donated medical supplies. Another man told me he was offered drug paraphernalia frequently by city workers the whole time he was homeless on the street, but he was never once asked if he'd like help getting into a recovery program or offered a shelter bed. The result is startling. Over the overall county in which San Antonio is, which homelessness has gone down by over 11%. San Francisco, it's gone up 80%. Over the same period, homelessness in downtown San Antonio has gone down by 80%. In San Francisco, again, we're working with our coalition is coming alongside the Salvation Army to roll out a new initiative called The Way Out. Salvation Army is one of the largest property owners in San Francisco. And of course, it has deep experience in dealing with these populations. We're targeting this at the chronically homeless, who comprise 30% of the homeless population. Of that population, officially 63% are dealing with substance abuse issues. People who are on the street actually estimate it much higher, 80% or more. 60% of participants in 60 to 90 day detox treatments come off the street. Currently, San Francisco operates what's called, among those in the know, a washing machine. People endlessly cycling between the street, rehab, and housing. Since the passage of Obamacare, 60 to 90-day detox programs are funded by Medi-Cal. However, at the end of that time, graduates either return to the streets or they're put into single-room occupancy hotels, and a mixed population of people who are still using drugs and mentally ill, and people trying to stay sober, which obviously doesn't work very well. They fall out of sobriety and often end up back on the street. Overall, the relapse rate is 90%, an incredible waste of resources, and of course, human dignity. However, as Haven and other research confirms, with sustained support and wraparound services, the success rate grows from 10% to 90%. So we've set an ambitious goal for over the next 10 years. We plan to provide a way out of homelessness for every San Francisco resident who suffers from substance abuse and desires to change. We're going to do this by redeveloping 6 of the Salvation Army's properties. We don't have one large campus like Haven, but these 6 properties are concentrated pretty closely together south of Market, and we can provide all the services among these properties. We're going to build 1,500 new beds with supportive programming, including recovery, workforce development, life skills training, and so much more, much as the Haven model. So again, the current challenge is the government policy and funding is solely directed to housing first, which is feeding the current crisis and consuming vast resources. Reducing the crisis requires both programmatic changes and policy changes. Programmatically, here we see there are lots of ways people become homeless, and we need to provide lots of ways for them to get out of homelessness. On a policy basis, we have to close off the streets. We have to say, okay, here's your options. You can go to this shelter, you can go into this program. We'll give you a bus ticket if you want to go somewhere. Here's a variety of places you can go, but you cannot be on the street. We have to restore civil society. We have to recognize that leaving people in the street is a death sentence. It is not compassionate. It is not liberal. It is not helping people. All it's doing is destroying our cities and destroying the people who are living there. The Independent Institute is involved in this for education. So we've completed a peer-reviewed policy report that looks into the causes of homelessness again, and policies and the outcomes that they're achieving. We look at alternative models and the outcomes that they're achieving, and then we propose policy solutions as well as program solutions. We've just wrapped production of a documentary which follows this along. We look at San Francisco, we look at San Antonio, comparing and contrasting and suggesting that San Francisco follow the model I've outlined under here. We will be doing we have a beyondhomeless.org website under development, which will be a clearinghouse for information about homelessness for people who want to learn more. It will also have profiles of individuals experiencing homelessness so people can get to know them and understand the issue more. This is part of a larger educational and promotional campaign. We really need people to understand who the homeless are, what got them here, and what's going to help them and our communities. So I really appreciate being able to present to groups such as yours. And then we need to widen this into every network that we can find to help people understand the issues and push for a different approach. Importantly, we're casting a vision of success. We're not trying not to point fingers. We're trying to point a finger up to the way out of this problem. I think skipped one. So again, Independent is the source of ideas, studies, success stories. We want to spread them through the documentary, website, media, screenings and discussions to feed action. The way out is one answer. We hope others will jump in with others. really get involved in their neighborhoods and in their neighborhood associations and in community groups at large. And then as we roll out these things, we'll be tracking the data, we'll be learning. We'll take that learning back into the future and more success. Success breeds success. As we roll out, we'll be seeking partners to help educate the broader community. We hope you all will be part of that. The documentary is going to be released in the fall, and we're working currently with some broadcast options. We'll also be organizing screenings with panel discussions and other outreach. The documentary is only 38 minutes long, so it lends itself very well to an event in which people can watch the documentary and then have a really deep discussion following of, okay, what can we do on the ground? What can we do as a community coming together? I now want to show you a very quick trailer of the documentary just to give you a taste for it. And I need to make sure that I am sharing. Okay, just share sound. Hopefully I've got this properly so it'll sound good. I had some problem with sound the other day. Anyway, this is only a minute long, so here we go.
San Francisco, the city by the sea.
California really was the Golden State when I arrived in the 70s. Oops.
San Francisco, the city by the sea.
California really was the Golden State when I arrived in the 70s. The streets of San Francisco were vibrant, free, and filled with hope. Now my beloved San Francisco has become known as ground zero for our nation's homelessness crisis.
Things are worse now for the homeless than ever. San Franciscans have reached a tipping point.
After 40 years of failed approaches to reverse homelessness here, these once hopeful streets are filled with despair and brokenness. And until we tackle this problem, this will be our narrative.
There isn't enough drug treatment for everybody in the city.
What are you doing with all this money that has been allotted to the city? Where's that going?
So there's almost no development that anyone has a legal right to do in California.
We have pitted the smallest differences against each other.
You could not arrest this issue away. You cannot arrest homelessness away.
Nobody is doing anything transformational.
Leaving people untreated is murder.
We're throwing vast resources at this issue, and it just keeps going up. Really, we can't come up with anything better than that? Beyond Homeless, Finding Hope is an exploration of what's driving the homelessness crisis here in California, and a look at alternative approaches around the country that offer hope with real solutions. Join us in changing the narrative of our nation's homelessness crisis. So thank you very much. We do hope we can leverage your group and information to help educate and change things in our communities. I'm happy to answer any questions or talk about this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. This is Steve Schramm, and we do have a few questions, both before and during your presentation. Just want to remind our members to submit any additional questions through the chat room feature, and we will be sharing those with Mary. So you painted a rather stark contrast between the solutions proposed in San Antonio versus what San Francisco is doing. And I like to believe that leaders in San Francisco are aware of what's going on around the country. And so what is their reaction to some of the solutions like the one in San Antonio?
I don't know. This housing first narrative is very dogmatic. And although there are multiple studies that have been released showing that it doesn't actually work, everybody keeps coming back with housing first works for everybody. And they're very, very married to it. And they love to talk about how much they're spending and their outputs. but they do not talk about their outcomes. And it's very hard to have a dialogue. So in the course of doing the documentary, we've reached out. I've actually done co-presentations with the former director of Housing and Homeless Services. We both presented to a couple of neighborhood groups last year via Zoom. So she made her presentation and I made my presentation, but there was not a dialogue about it. People would ask, she actually left the meeting. So, and then in the documentary, we reached out to the mayor's office to talk to somebody there, and they referred us to the Department of Housing and Homeless Services, who, after a couple of weeks, and other people also approaching them on our behalf, came back and said, well, they're just too busy. They couldn't provide somebody for an hour for an interview. And that same day that I got the email, it came out that the director of the department had resigned suddenly. So it's very dysfunctional. And everybody with whom we talked just describes City Hall as very dysfunctional, not talking to other people. They're extremely wedded to their housing first narrative. And we've got to get people off of that narrative and talking about housing first may be fine for some people, but clearly it's not solving the problem, and other things need to be provided as well.
Is this a short-term versus long-term consideration that San Francisco is focusing on the short term, just get people off the streets, versus San Antonio taking a longer, more strategic view and developing a solution for the longer term?
The term for housing first is permanent supportive housing. So it's considered the long-term solution. You put people in housing that they stay in permanently. And again, it's incredible. These are not short-term shelters. They're apartments that people can live in forever. They do need to come up with money to help pay for it at a very subsidized rate, but they still cost an incredible amount of money to build and then operate, because they're being operated at a loss, obviously. Even if somebody is paying 30% of their income for rent, which is the formula, that's not covering the cost of these units. So it's an incredibly expensive solution. And again, as I said, it doesn't last. People who go into housing first, many of them fall back out into the streets because they're living in addiction and mental illness. And for whatever reason, they don't stay in their housing. And then you have this flood that continues to come into the streets. You take one person off the streets and another 3 people come in. Yeah. So it's not a permanent solution.
What's the
The
role?
only
of the
permanent
state?
solution is addressing the underlying causes. You've got to get to the root cause of why are you home? The other aspect of it is housing. But the government building so-called affordable housing at $500,000 to $900,000 per unit is not the solution. The solution is to get rid of these stupid housing regulations and CEQA that make it impossible to build anything in California. We are short 3.5 million units of housing, an estimate, in California, and building a couple thousand units a year is never going to get us out of that. There was a White House Council of Economic Advisors study that showed if housing was deregulated in California, homelessness would go down by 54%. So that is a big part of it.
What's the role of the state here? Now, Governor Newsom is under a lot of pressure right now. So does he have a role in this as well?
Very definitely. And he's directing, he's just proclaimed another $12 billion to be spent, but it's the same model. It's the same housing first model. So it's going to be another $12 billion wasted end up with more homeless on the street.
Yeah. Talk about Contra Costa County. So we've seen more and more homelessness in our county as well. What do you see for our county?
Again, and Oakland as well, and San Jose. I mean, it's a California-wide and certainly Bay Area-wide phenomenon. Unless cities and counties take the stand that homeless people cannot take over the commons, right? The streets. And especially with encampments, encampments are dysfunctional. They're dangerous. They're exploitive. They're places where women are regularly being raped. There's a lot of drug use. They're being run like kind of Lord of the Flies communities, and they're very, very, very bad. In Oakland, Oakland Fire Department responds to an average of 2 fires a day at encampments around the city. Encampments here have exploded, and the city last year enacted an encampment management policy. I was on the Citizen Review Committee at the time. There were an estimated 80 encampments in Oakland. They wanted to contract those to 40, to which they provided services. So I advised them against having a homelessness encampment policy and instead having congregate housing with services actually provided. But anyway, fell on deaf ears. So today there are twice as many encampments as then. There are an estimated 160 encampments in Oakland. And Oakland is not a big city. And this is going on everywhere. The government is allowing people to take over the commons to live there. And they are not pursuing anything other than this very expensive permanent supportive housing, which takes years and years to build. So it's not happening and it's too expensive. Instead of encouraging nonprofits, and even I'm against government funding for nonprofits, it corrupts them, but if they're going to spend this kind of money, they should be directing it to other services such as temporary shelter, long-term shelter, and transformative programs like Haven for Hope. Not everybody is going to avail themselves of a path out of addiction and mental illness. Fine. Then you have custodial care for the mentally ill, where they're no longer hurting themselves and they're actually getting psychiatric care, which is no longer like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Psychiatric care now is actually quite good and humane. And you can have safe places for people to be off the street where they can use drugs, be drunk, but they're now not out in the community causing harm to others and to themselves and in the community. Mm-hmm. So you have multiple options and tell people you can go to one of these places. We'll give you a bus ticket to someplace else if that's what you want, but you cannot stay on the street.
Now you mentioned nonprofits, and last month we heard a presentation from Habitat for Humanity. And are there groups like that or United Way that might have a more significant role in this?
Yeah, again, Habitat for Humanity is great, but again, they face the same barriers to being able to build that anybody else does. There's so much legal recourse that anybody has to block anybody from building anything anywhere currently, that even people who are want to provide housing for the poor or even the middle class now can't afford to live in California, are tied up in the courts and the regulatory agencies for years. We've got to stop making anybody in California can anonymously object to any development of anything. And the objection will hold it up indefinitely. Yeah. This is just plain nuts. And again, not even the middle class can afford to own homes now. And there's so much evidence that home ownership accrues tremendous benefits to the community at large. Higher high school graduation rates, higher entrepreneurship, higher employment, everything. Mm-hmm. It's just nutty that we've made it impossible for people to live here. Yeah. So San Antonio. Mm-hmm. You're welcome to live on our streets.
San Antonio has a different housing regulatory environment, right? It's probably easier to build things, but there must have been some local opposition in San Antonio to Haven for Hope. So how did they get past that opposition?
They just presented a united front. As I mentioned, the mayor was a Democrat, and the businessmen who came up with the idea had actually opposed his election, but they came together on a common goal and just presented the political will. We are going to do this. And again, they went to all the nonprofits and said, we want you to partner with this. And none of the nonprofits wanted to be part of it because they said, oh, we're going to lose our funding. We're going to lose our base of support. And I didn't get the full story of what kind of coercion was used to get them all aligned, but they did. And now they're all universally singing the praises of this model, that it is better for everybody. And they all have more secure funding because people see that this collaborative effort works. And then they're saving money. They're all, 80 of them are housed at Haven, in this building at Haven. So not everybody has to have their own Xerox machine. Not everybody has to have their own this, their own that, their own this. So each of them is saving money. And they're also, I heard stories about, donor comes and they want to give one of these nonprofits some money. And the nonprofit will say, well, actually, what your donor intent is better served by these people over here. And they'll literally take them over to the other organization and introduce them and say, these are the people who are doing what you're describing that you want. And they'll do that together, and they're all doing better as a result. But it's going to take political will. And that's what Independent is trying to do with this policy report, which makes the nonpartisan, the scholarly case for a different approach. And then the documentary, which we're using, we want to build a popular, popular support for, hey, let's do some of these different, that's a really good idea. Why don't we do that here and overcome the opposition? Because there is a homelessness industrial complex that has a vested interest in things being done as they're being done now. And it's going to take real political will and the community presenting a united front to say, we are going to try these other things, an additive approach.
Are we investing enough in psychiatric services, or
No.
does that need to be ramped up?
Yes. So I'll give it an example. Amsterdam, which used to be sort of the poster child for free love and free drug use, right? And it's a very liberal country. But they got fed up with living in a city that's overrun by rampant drug use in the open. And about 20 years ago, they shifted their approach and they set up residential psychiatric and outpatient psychiatric services, as well as safe drug sites and drug treatment programs and so on. And again, closed off the streets. You can use drugs, you can have psychiatric problems, but you can't be on the streets. Here are places you can go. We've got a hospital, we've got outpatient services, long-term permanent outpatient services, and we've got drug use places where you can go and use drugs, and drug recovery places. And they've closed it off, and it works very effectively. People with mental health issues can have again, they can have permanent psychiatric services on an outpatient basis, and it keeping them able to live in an apartment safely.
Now, what's happening in other major cities around the country? Do they have the problem the same as San Francisco, or less of a problem? Or?
Okay, so homelessness nationwide was dropping, except for in California, but a couple of years ago that changed. The federal government changed its policy to housing first, and the problem with that is it cut off funding for these other models. So now homelessness across the country is going up, and we've got to get San Antonio. So Haven for Hope is a public-private partnership. It's about half privately funded, about half funded, but it's city, county, and state money. It's not federal money, because the federal government will not fund programs like this. And the federal government money disproportionately impacts programming everywhere, even though it doesn't even make up, the majority of funding, it has an outsized impact on the approaches that people do, because that's the way it is. So we've got to get, we're going to have to do this locally, and then ideally, eventually the feds are going to catch on.
Could you talk about the demographics?
I'm sorry?
Could you talk about the demographics of the homeless population? Young versus old, racial profile, that kind of thing.
It's becoming increasingly older. It used to be primarily younger, but you've got a lot of people over 60 who are homeless. Now, another cause of later in life homelessness is being hospitalized later in life. Also being prescribed opiates in the hospital and getting addicted, which has happened to people, and they end up homeless and so on. It's disproportionately African-American. I attribute that to the fact that African-American families are almost all now headed by single women and in poverty as a result of that. It's our no man in the house law that we had under welfare certainly contributed to that. And now it's just, it's cultural, that the vast majority, 80% of African-American children are born to a single mother. It's a recipe for poverty. It's a recipe for a very traumatic childhood. Oakland certainly is a case study. We have just bands of fatherless boys forming gangs, and that's their family. And they don't think they're going to live to see 25. So they're very reckless and violent. And during COVID, it got much worse because kids were not in schools. Violent offenders as young as 11 were involved in crime increasingly in places like Oakland. It's a very dysfunctional community, and we have to address it. And unfortunately, these trends are now moving into the white community. Asian Americans in San Francisco comprise 30% of the population, but only 6% of homelessness. And African Americans are exactly the flip side. They comprise something like 5 or 6% of the population and 30% of the homeless. Asian American families are very intact, are very strong. African American families are very broken and problematic.
So what can our members do to, gain access to the studies that Independent Institute has done, access to the documentary later in the fall, and just in general, make themselves more aware of the situation?
So we'll be using the new website, beyondhomeless.org, as a clearinghouse for everything. We'll have the policy report there. We'll have links to the documentary and to screening information there, as well as other information. And, I and other author contributors to the policy report and the documentary are very happy to come to any group or participate via Zoom. We'll be happy to screen the documentary for anybody and help facilitate a conversation following it. This needs to be a community level change. It's the only way it's going to happen. It's not going to happen politically. It's going to happen by people getting informed and wanting to be part of the kind of community-wide solution that San Antonio has implemented.
Mary, thank you so much. Appreciate the presentation and response to our questions.
I appreciate your group very much. Thank you so much for inviting me. And hopefully you're going to give everybody my email and contact information, and I'm always available to answer any questions or listen to what you have to say.
All right, excellent. And we'll be posting the video on our website for other members who weren't able to attend today.
Great. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, guys, that was very intriguing. And boy, our politicians don't know how to deal with the issue, do they? What else is new? Our next meeting, September 13th. Stay tuned. Have a good week, guys.